Do you need a CAPA for your CAPA process? This is something that our team thinks about every single time we actually go out and do an internal audit for a company. If we see any problems with their CAPA process, the first thing we think is, do they need a CAPA for their CAPA process? This is probably the most common non-conformity or 483 that we see, whether it's the FDA or a notified body, MDSAP audit, or CAPA is probably the number one place we see non-conformity. When you get a non-conformity in an audit, well, it seems kind of silly that I would have to open up a process. It's not working. How do I get my CAPA process to work? So what we came up with here today is 9 steps that you should be following for your CAPA process. And the first one is, what are you reviewing for inputs into your CAPA process to decide, is there something wrong that I need a CAPA for? What are your inputs? They should not only be internal audit findings, only be third-party audit findings, or only FDA 483. So first party, second party, third party audits, yes, you need CAPAs from those, but that shouldn't be the only thing you open up CAPAs for. Those are supposed to be spot checks that you're doing. Your first party audits, your internal audits, are supposed to be more aggressive than the FDA and more aggressive than your notified body, your MDSAP auditor. But even those are spot checks. You should have other mechanisms that are catching it before you're doing your internal audits. So if there's a real problem, you're catching it early. You should have some sort of a process where you're monitoring and measuring, and you can see from the metrics, there's something wrong. I need to fix it. So what would be the other things that you might include? Well, let's start down the list. Number 1, non-conforming materials. That would be hot on the list. Complaints, that would be another one. Any supplier quality issues would be another one. Any metrics that you see where you're not meeting your quality objective, that would be another one. If you have a manager review and your management team sees something that they don't like, they can say, hey, let's open up a CAPA for this. If you see your risk management process is not effective and you aren't updating your risk management in a timely manner, when you have complaints, smart surveillance, open up a CAPA. Surveillance would be a source of CAPAs as well for us to release, but component we really ought to be thinking about trade 0.1 or 2.1 that's going to address this problem. So just open up a CAPA for it, and that'll be the next design project right behind this. Any kind of time where you have maintenance issues. So companies that manufacture things, they have equipment, they have maintenance issues. And if you said, well, we don't have any maintenance because we have software as a medical device. Oh, you have tons of CAPAs. Every single time you find a bug, and show me software that doesn't have a bug and there's something wrong. Either 4 lines of code or it doesn't work at all. If you have software, you have bugs. If you have software, you have cybersecurity risks. So every single time you have a cybersecurity vulnerability or you have a bug in your software, that's an issue that needs to be considered for a potential CAPA. Now, does every single nonconformity that you find deserve a full-blown CAPA? No, but we'll get to that. The first step is make sure you get enough things going into your CAPA process. And when I was trained on this, it was Kim Troutman that taught the training, and she drew a big C and she showed all these arrows going into it. And next Tuesday, when I publish the blog, I'm going to be reproducing that diagram. And you can already find it on our website. I've used it multiple times. It's just a big C and all kinds of things going into the CAPA process. So you need to make sure that you have lots of inputs into that CAPA process. This is not some place to be because that's how you improve your quality system. Some companies talk about continuous improvements. Some talk about just improvement. That's what FDA wants when there's something that's conforming. But either way, action or CAPA, if you're not familiar. So the other method would be a preventive action. And how do you get preventive actions? Well, could be opportunities for improvement identified in an audit where they said it's not non-conforming yet, but it could be in the future. That would be an example. But the best source of preventive actions is going to be metrics where you see a negative trend. The way the FDA describes it is when you see a nonconformity in one area, look for other areas, other processes that are similar, other products that are similar, where it could occur again. And if you implement those corrective actions in other areas, they're considered preventive actions in the other areas. There's lots of debates about, is it a true preventive action or is it a corrective action? Stop worrying about it. I mean, yes, you do need some preventive actions if you have ISO 1345 because it's a separate clause, but in the near future, they're going to be changing it to the same format as 9001. And when that happens, I have a feeling that preventive action might disappear. We'll see what happens. But the point is, if you have a mature quality system that's working really well, you should have most of the problems fixed, and you should be relying much more on metrics, analysis, statistics, to find ways to improve your quality system, and much less on reactive things like I've got complaints and bad product. What do I do about it? So that's the big difference between corrective and preventive. It's where you are in the development cycle of your company. An early stage company really has a hard time coming up with preventive because everything's broken. They're just starting out and everything's not working quite right yet. But how quickly they get there depends on how many CAPAs they work on and how aggressively and how well those CAPAs are done. Brings us to the second issue. So the second step of the process for CAPAs is to define or describe what the issue is, the quality issue, and reference that quality issue, the source of it. In this case, the tool that you want to use is copy and paste. Copy and paste. You have a nonconformity, you wrote it up in a nonconformity material report, copy, paste into the CAPA. Don't do any editing, just copy and paste it, and then put a cross-reference to what nonconforming material number it was. If it's an audit finding, copy and paste out of the audit report and reference what audit report, what finding. So if you have 4 or 5 findings, is it finding 1, 2, 3, or 4? That's step 2. Step 3, the root cause analysis. I'm going to put a link down below here. I already have a YouTube video that talks about different ways to perform root cause analysis. There are a couple other ways to do root cause analysis that I don't have in that video. I'm not going to cover them here. They're more nuances or slight variations of the ones that I've already got there for you. But the bottom line for root cause analysis is people stop at symptoms. So whenever you are working on a CAPA and you're trying to figure out what was the cause of this, it's not the symptom. The cause of you being overweight isn't that you're fat. That's just the symptom. The fatness didn't make you overweight. They're the same thing. It's just the symptom. Why are you fat? Not enough exercise, didn't eat enough. A whole lot of reasons why you're overweight, but it's not being fat. That's just a symptom. So why customer complaints? Because this is broke is not the answer. Cause has to do with why breaking. You got to ask the question why. So analysis, but you typically do ask the question why multiple times to get down to what is the root cause. And at the end of the day, almost always it's one of 4 things. One of 4 things. Now there is a 5th one, but there's nothing I can do about that one, and there's nothing really I can do to help you. That particular one is you just don't care. So if you don't care about quality, I can't help you. Why are you watching this video if you don't care? But if you care and you're watching this video, there are 4 root causes that you're going to get to. Number 1 on the list, and I'll slide back so I don't get any. Number 1, your procedure is not adequate. If your procedure is not adequate, or you think it's not adequate, or you see an opportunity to improve it, start rewriting it. Rewrite it now. Improve it now. Don't wait until 6 months from now when you finally decided, yeah, was the procedure. If you think that the procedure could be improved at the very beginning of your investigation of root cause, start working on that right away. You can add additional root causes, often more than one root cause. We call it root cause because we assume there's going to be one and we're trying to get to the root of the matter. However, there might be more than one thing going on here. For instance, another possibility is not only is the procedure not adequate, but I didn't train anybody. Okay? Not training anybody is not really the root cause. Do you have requirements documented? Do you track your training? Do you have training effectiveness? Do you have training competency? Who do you have training them? What is your training program? All these things fall under training. So if you're really digging down through that 5 why analysis, you're probably going to come to we're not tracking our training well enough, or we don't have it documented well enough. We don't have proper resources for training. We don't have effectiveness. We don't have competency identified. Those are possible things related to training, but reading and understanding, not an effective method of learning anything. Yeah, I read it yesterday, but I don't remember it. Why do we do training, decay, and usability studies? Because people forget instructions. That's why we give pop quizzes and things to remind kids, oh, hey, we're going to have a quiz on this at the end of today is a pop quiz, so pay attention. And then at the end of the semester, we're going to have a midterm exam, and you're going to have to pass that, or you repeat this class. So reading and understanding normally not the best. They have to study it and study it and study it and practice and practice and practice. So we give them a quiz to determine. In a lot of things where you're manufacturing something or you're auditing or inspecting, you need this competency. And if the person has 20, 80 and you just might not have the skills. Football player. I'm 6'6", but I just don't dribble that well. So, and my shooting is definitely not Larry Bird worthy. So I'm not going to be a pro basketball player, but I'm tall enough. That's not the problem. It's not the height. It's the practice. So what else is on the list? What are those 4 things? One was procedure. One was training. The next one on the list is resources. And this one's tough for companies because if they admit the issue is resources, how are they going to address that? And usually that means adding a headcount, but it doesn't always mean adding a headcount. I just did an audit a few weeks back, and the client had the best answer for this. We cross-train people. You don't always have the resources that you need in the department where the work is. But if you have cross-trained people, you can pull people from departments where they have less work, move them over, and get the work done. In this company, in order to get bonuses and get raises, people had to be cross-trained in so many jobs, and that was tracked. And that was the basis for promotions and raises. If you weren't cross-trained in other jobs and you weren't qualified to do those other jobs, you were not eligible for some of those raises and promotions. So that was a great way to make sure that they had the resources available somewhere in the company, even if it wasn't in the department where they had the problem. And that was a company that really operated at the peer level, middle level managers. I'll help you out. This person's a little slow right now, so we'll loan you their resources. Oh, that person's going on vacation. You can borrow this resource, and they'll get it done. So that's a great way to handle that. Also, in this modern age, we have temp resources of so many different varieties. You have them offshore, you have them in-house, you have people working remotely, you have part-time, you have temp agencies. There are so many other ways. Oh, yes, you can automate things too. We have software that can increase productivity. We have all kinds of automation tools. So it's not always just hire a person. If the resources are the issue, there are lots of resources. Training so people are more effective in their job. More equipment, better software, better tools for productivity. People, that would be another one, and any kind of machinery. So all those things come together. It's usually people, machinery, or software, and training. Those are the things that you really look at as the primary resources. buckets that you should be evaluating. And oh, by the way, in your management review, there's a place for recommendations for resources and what resource needs we have as an output of the management review. So that should not be an empty slide. If you're also saying lack of resources is the root cause for a CAPA. And the last one on the list, number 4 on our list for root causes, management oversight. If you're not measuring it, nobody's going to pay attention to it. So if you measure it and you follow up on it and say, hey, why was this number off? That will be showing people that it's important because management's following up and watching the metric. They want it in a very public place. They want it updated on a regular basis. They want it updated by the person doing the work. And they've identified, here's my control limit. I don't want you above that line or below this line. And they're going to track it. And when you fall above or below the lines for where you said this is where it has to be, they take action. A CAPA. Maybe it's a preventive action if you're getting close. It's a corrective action if you cross the line. Or if you have SPC techniques, you have your control limits and you have your spec limits. If it's in between the control limit and the spec limit, it's a preventive action. If it exceeds the spec limit, now you're into corrective action territory. So that's giving you sort of a glimpse at what are the metrics for. And oh yes, you're required to have monitoring metrics in your system. So next item on the list. Sorry. Step number 4. We identify what the input, we copy and paste. That's called the investigation. And whether you need a new CAPA or not. So some things are not worthy of a CAPA, some things are. Some things you say, well, we don't have a metric for that. Let's correct it and then measure it on an ongoing basis. And based on the metrics, we'll decide whether it deserves a CAPA. That's one strategy for a low risk item. For a systemic problem that crosses all kinds of processes, you might have to have a quality plan. We're going to have to revamp our whole quality system because they changed the standard and now we don't comply and it affects all these procedures. This isn't just one issue, it's multiple issues across the board. Let's come up with a quality plan. That would be a great way to use a quality plan. The other extreme at the bottom end is that's only a minor problem. We think we'll correct it, and then we'll continue to monitor and measure that as a quality objective and take action as a CAPA if we see it's a problem. And then the middle would be a CAPA. So you don't want death by CAPA. You don't want every single nonconformity results in one. When you already have a CAPA for something, you don't open up another one for the same root cause. So if you haven't taken the time to figure out what the root cause is, you're not ready to identify what the corrective action will be. You can take correction. Don't delay in correction. Don't delay in containment. And if you know that the procedure is not adequate or somebody doesn't have training, at least take those actions. But that doesn't mean you're done identifying the root cause. So there's no reason to delay on things you're confident need to be fixed, but that doesn't mean your investigation's done. And there's nothing wrong. Nobody will come along and slap you because you didn't finish your investigation before you took action. That's not the problem. The problem is not finishing your investigation. You can take actions and then finish your investigation and add more causes to the list and maybe the two that are just related to symptoms. Make sure that you take actions without delay. Case in point, you know the procedures, missing a step, fix it right away. And then everybody on it. Next on the list, plan and document corrective actions, including updating documents. In this case, ideally what you want is to list each containment action, each correction, and each corrective action. You want to have a due date and you want to have the person responsible. I'll repeat. All the containment measures, all the corrections, all the corrective actions, the due date for each one, and the person responsible. Yes, you need all of those. Now, that's just your plan. Your corrective action plan is containment measures, corrections, and corrective actions. It can grow over time. It might be this after 1 week. this after 2 weeks, and this after 3 weeks. As you learn more and figure out better ways of fixing the problem, you can add on additional actions. That's okay. Don't delay. Just continue to do the research, do your investigation, and add on corrective actions as needed, but take immediate ones if needed. Then, as you do each item, you want to have a separate place in your record where you indicate what actions you actually took and when they were done. Ideally, you'd actually include a copy of the record. So I modified the procedure. Here's the DCN and the copy of the red line procedure. I trained the people. Here's a copy of the training record. Here's a copy of the effectiveness check, the quiz. Here's a competency check. I revalidated the process. I made a process change. Here's a copy of the validation report. As I do each thing, I put it in there. Don't do anything for an extended period of time. Have an auditor or inspector say I'm taking undue delay in implementing. Like we're waiting what the due date is. That's important to what you're waiting for and how when that will arrive. If you have a CAPA board, and I have another video I'll put down below about CAPA boards, you want to make sure that you have identified what was the action taken, what the board. So discussion about that, CAPA conclusions, what actions they took, comment that and write to the CAPA. On this date, the CAPA board met, and this is what we did about it. Maybe further discussion, still on track, still waiting. Real short, one sentence. Whatever it is, write it down in the record so they can't you didn't even pay attention. You also, if you need to fix a procedure, you can always look at revising your procedure and making it better. If the problem is with your CAPA process, procedure for you, and I'm in the process of updating that, so next week that will be available. Next Tuesday there will be an updated blog. We have a 2013 blog, so it's almost glacial at this point. It's so old. With 2013 blog, we're going to rewrite the blog. It's almost done, and we're going to be updating the procedure. So if you bought our CAPA course, you're going to get a free update. If you haven't, now's your opportunity to improve your CAPA process by improving the procedure. In this video, would count as training. Step 6 in performance. You have a change. Just because the change sounded like a great idea doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be compliant with the regulations. Sometimes people are like, oh, well, we're not getting this done in enough time. Let's make the timeline longer so we don't have to get it done so quick. But if there's a requirement to get things done in a certain length of time, like adverse event reporting or recalls, or you need to get complaints done instantly, well, those extending the duration that you can work on those according to your procedure may not be in compliance with the regulations. So that's an example of where you get into problems. If you make a change like, well, we'll just open up the spec. Oh, we pass the spec every time and it passes all tests. Opening up the spec, will that make sure that the device is still safe and performs as required? So have you redone your verification testing? Have you redone your validation? Sometimes you make a change and you think it's going to be an improvement, but you don't realize that improvement also impacted something else and it caused it to fail somewhere. Whenever you're doing a design change of any kind of process change, there's usually a design validation, design re-verification, or a process revalidation that has to be done. So you can't just make the change and approve it. You have to validate it. That's why the change process is so important, to make sure you've done a proper assessment of whether revalidation is required and if a new regulatory approval is required. Yes, that would be part of regulatory compliance. You make a change, is it a letter file or is it a 510K? I know I've talked about that before. Step 7, you have to do an effectiveness check. I have another YouTube video about that. The link will be down below. I also have a blog about effectiveness checks, making sure they're quantitative. I actually was reading a book about CAPAs. It's probably the best book out there on CAPAs. It's about 125 pages. But the problem with CAPA effectiveness checks is usually that people say, well, I looked to see if the problem happened again and it didn't, so everything must be fine now. But did you do enough of an investigation initially during your investigation of root cause to determine how often this will happen? If it happens 1 out of 100 times, you got to look at least 100 times in order to see if it even is improved. But effective, you might have to look at 200 or 300. This particular author, who is an ex-FDA inspector, actually said 10x. So what he meant by that is, if it's happening once a month, then look at 10 months. If it's happening once a week, look at 10 weeks. If it's happening one day, look at 10 days worth of data. If it's only happening once a year, you got to look at 10 years of data. So those orders from a particular supplier, you're only ordering it once a year, you're going to have to try a different approach than just waiting 10 years to close this CAPA. You're going to have to think about, oh, maybe we could do process validation at that supplier. Maybe we could do an audit of the supplier. I bet they make other things for other customers using the same process. Let's see if their corrective actions work for those products. So sometimes you have to come up with another approach, just waiting until it happens 10 times in order to get it done in a timely manner. When your annual basis, you're going to have to come up with a better solution. When it's happening on a weekly or daily basis, probably waiting until it happens 10 times is a good solution. So that's a nice rule of thumb. It's not written down anywhere except in his book, but it's not a bad strategy. I try to use the okay, it happened 1 out of 100 times just to see an improvement of anything, to look at it 100 times and really I want to see it. He's in 10 times. I'm a zealot because I want them to do an effect that's quantitative and look at more data than they had the problem with before. He's saying look at 10 times the data. So I would definitely say I'm on the right track. Maybe the happy medium is between those two numbers, but where I'm seeing most clients is I look at 3, the magic number of 3. It happens 1 out of 100 times, but I looked at 3 and those 3 look good. The other 97, I'm not sure. Step 8, record your CAPA results. So I had talked before about having 2 sections. This is the section for planned actions, and this is the section below for actual actions that I have taken and the date that I did them. I planned to do it on this date. Here's who was going to do it. And then down below, this is the date it actually was done, and here's who did it. And maybe attach the record of proof it was done. I had one of my auditors that was a good friend of mine. I ended up working with him for quite a few years after he audited me. He was my first auditor ever. But he said, you want to have the manila folder and have all the records you need in that manila folder and slide it across the table to the auditor inspector and say, here's everything you need. And if everything goes well, they don't need to ask for any other records. So you've got the DCNs in there for approval of document changes. You get the training records in there. You get the validation in there. You get the maintenance records in there. You got IQ, OQ, PQ if you change the process. So there's a lot of stuff in that folder. It's usually pretty fat if you've done a good job of your CAPA. And the last step, you close the CAPA. Now, over the years, I've said it doesn't really matter. You can close the CAPA after you've done the effectiveness check and it's successful, or you can keep it open if it's failed, or you can open up a new one and close the original one. So do you close the CAPA and open a new one, or do you just keep it open? And the more I thought over time, I think the right answer is probably just to close it, regardless of whether you pass the effectiveness check or not, and open up the CAPA if it failed the effectiveness check. You need to go back to the beginning of the process anyway, investigating a root cause. And so if you're going to go back, why not just open up a new CAPA? It's just a new number. And you're going to have traceability to the effectiveness check failed anyway to the previous CAPA. It'll also reset the timeline for that, and you hold yourself to the current requirements. But if a CAPA's been open for a really long time and you can't close it because you failed an effectiveness check, and you go back and start the whole process over again, It could be open for 2 years or more. That's not what you want. Close the CAPA, open up a new one if it failed the effectiveness check is what I think is the right approach. And I think a lot of people already are doing that. I hope that answers all your questions about what are the steps that you're supposed to be taking. And I listed 9 different steps in a CAPA. Look at the blog article next week. There'll be a link for the blog article, even though it'll take you to the old version until the new one's published. And if you need a CAPA for your CAPA process, take a procedure, and that might help you, and maybe some of the other trainings that I provide links for below. Thank you, everybody. Have a great